All right, guys, so we got this new chart just dropped. This is in Mediaite. Cable news shows and networks ranked for bias and accuracy. So we're going to dive into the specifics in just a second, but let me just give you the rundown here. This was made by a Colorado startup called Ad Fontes, which apparently means to the sources in Latin. They recently raised $4.2 million in a first round of financing. Now, I find this hilarious for a number of reasons. Literally any schmuck in the world could put together a media bias chart and throw up the people there, however they want to put them up there. Did you really need to raise $4.2 million for something like this? Where did they get that money? Interesting. So I'm sure it's from, whatever, big banks, the money people. We call them money changers. It's supposed to be like a pejorative, because it is a pejorative. These are like the Wall Street types. I'm sure if we look into the specifics of where this money came from, it wouldn't be all that pretty. But anyway, let's look at this chart. Now, by the way, yours truly is not included. I am not on this chart. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The Young Turks made the chart. Apparently, David Pakman made it. Lee Camp made it. And then on the right, you can see here, we have basically all the Fox News shows like The Five, Cavuto, Greg Gutfeld. Greg Kelly made it. He's like a Newsmax host. I think you also have the Daily Wire on here somewhere. You can see Alex Jones. He's on the bottom far right. But notice something about this chart. It drives me crazy that this is a thing that people think is real and worthy of pretending like it's objective, right? You'll notice that in the chart, that you're quote unquote more reliable the higher up you are. And the lower you are less reliable. What they have here is the right and the left are put in the less reliable category. And the ones in the center are all corporate and either like pro-Democrat Party leaning or quote-unquote centrist leaning. So in the middle here you have CBS, you have NBC, you have CNN, you have PBS NewsHour. And so the takeaway from this chart is supposed to be the more corporate you are, the more you're backed by big money interests, like the bigger your name is as a legacy media outlet, and the more you try to do like neutrality, the more truth you're getting out there into the world. And that is just totally bogus. I completely and utterly disagree with that framing. No, oftentimes these mainstream media outlets, like the ones they're putting in the top here, spread misinformation like nobody's business. NBC and MSNBC were the ones who were screaming from the top of their lungs that Donald Trump was Vladimir Putin's agent, that there were piss tapes of Russian hookers peeing on Donald Trump, that he was a Kremlin asset since 1987. That was literally an Alex Jones tier conspiracy theory, but somehow they still make it in the most reliable portion of this chart. Go back and look at CNN's coverage in the lead up to the Iraq War. Whatever the Pentagon was saying, whatever George Bush and Dick Cheney were saying, however they were lying about Saddam Hussein and his connection to Osama and 9/11, they just ran with it. They never get knocked for their falsehoods, for when they totally misreport stories. I mean, I remember CNN during the primary in 2016 and in 2020, they did this bogus reporting about how, oh my God, Medicare for all, it would cost trillions and trillions more than what we spend now. When that is objectively untrue, it actually saves trillions of dollars. And look, these are just a few examples that I'm giving you, but the point is this. Like, if you are wrong, but you're wrong in service of the establishment, then you're considered more reliable. But I don't agree with that. That's not true. So sometimes you're going to get the truth from people who might be on one side or the other politically. You know, it's not calling it 50-50 all the time, trying to be neutral is not the same as being objective. Being objective is telling the truth no matter where the facts land. That's what being objective is. And sometimes those facts will cut in the left-wing direction, and in some instances they might cut in the right-wing direction. But all that should matter is the facts, right? And you can interpret those facts however you want. But the facts are the most important. Now look, I understand. I would agree that certainly when it comes to print outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Wall Street Journal, whatever, the print version of them, the more straight news portion, they do a decent job. I put print in a totally separate category than cable news on TV. So I'm willing to admit that. But certainly, cable news, the talking heads, the people who are pretending to be reporters or journalists when they're just news actors, they are not the most reliable. And this chart says a lot more about the company that did it than it does about the news outlets they're reporting on. So it's just, the bias is so clear. It's a bias towards corporatism and centrism. That's the bias. And I just totally reject that. I completely and utterly reject that. And I think the sad thing is that this view of media is probably a very widely held view in the American public. That, like, the more big funding there is into your media outlet, and the more you try to do neutrality reporting, giving credit to both sides, they think the more true it is. But no, oftentimes what you're seeing is false balance and false equivalency. And the establishment has its own sacred cows and their own things that they don't question, which are deeply political and untrue. I guess I'm happy I'm left off of this, because if I was in it, I'm sure they would put me in the, very unreliable camp and on the far left or whatever, even though I wouldn't agree with either one of those categorizations. You can see where their bias is. It's crystal clear. Don't for a second think that this stuff represents the truth. It most certainly is not the truth. And if you want to test that claim, do yourself a favor. Watch a show like mine, or watch a show like TYT, or watch a Ben Shapiro show, or, watch MSNBC or something, and take all their claims, whatever specific fact claims they make throughout the show, and then you check each one of those claims. And I would put my record on this show up against anybody, especially when it comes to my predictions. I would put my record up against anybody. But since I'm a lone guy on a YouTube show, and I curse, and I talk like I'm normal and don't put on like the news actor voice, that alone would bias them against me, because, I'm not part of that mainstream media pipeline where you have to wear a suit and tie every single day, and you have to, act professionally, and you have to try to be as neutral as possible. And since I don't play that game, and we're not funded by big money, it's, you'd be dismissed out of hand. But again, this chart says more about the people who made it than it does about the news outlets. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.